take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey! Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Monday, December 15th, 2014, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for being here today for our last full week of shows for 2014. Next week we'll be here Monday and Tuesday, but we begin our vacation on Christmas Eve. So on Monday and Tuesday we'll have a couple of shows for you, but then we're not back until the first Monday in January 2015. Also on that first Monday in January, some new lineup changes to 420radio.org. We'll be adding a few more shows and moving around some of the existing shows. So pay attention for that. That'll be happening during the Christmas break, and you can find out the details at 420radio.org/schedule. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting 420radio.org. If you can, become a VIP member of 420radio.org by visiting 420radio.org/donate. And you can do that by a monthly donation or just a one-time donation if you like. I got an email from a listener who wanted to know where to get the replays of Toker Talk Radio. And that's one of the things you have to be a VIP member to be able to get to. If you become a VIP member, you can go to the 420 Radio site, look under shows, and you'll find Toker Talk Radio in that menu if you're logged in. And if you have any other questions about how to use the site, or just suggestions or questions or comments you want to get to my eyes, you can send them to Russ at radicalruss.com. All right, on the show today, it's a Monday, so that means we'll be visiting with Dr. Mitch Earlywine in our Cannabis Q&A segment. So get your questions ready for our chat room, or you can dial in live at 971-533-7111. Also on the show today, we'll take some time to do a radical rant. I'm picking up a few stories coming from all the various ski resorts up there in Colorado, and they're a little worried about the perception of legal marijuana and how that might affect tourism out there in Breckenridge and Vail and Aspen and so forth. We'll take a look at that in the Radical Rant and discuss the changing perception of legal marijuana in this country. Also on the show today, we'll go behind the headlines, talking about, talk about changing perceptions. One of the last places in the world you might think marijuana reform was happening is Texas, the Lone Star State. In Behind the Headlines, we're going to talk about a congressman who was from El Paso who supports legalization, and a state rep from El Paso who supports decriminalization. Talking all about that right after our 420 Radio News. And in the news today, that Cannabis bill is making its way through the Senate, so it looks like we will have protections for the medical marijuana states. As far as the ban on DC legalization, the DC City Council is going to move forward and transmit that bill to Congress. We're looking at the fallout from the Department of Justice announcing that Native American tribes have the same rights under the Cole Memo as a state does when it comes to legalization. We'll take a look at one band of Indians in Alabama that are looking at possibly opening up pot sales. We've also got a public company cultivating, distributing, and selling marijuana that has won approval from the Securities and Exchange Commission to become the first public company involved in the marijuana business. Minnesota has finally gotten around to announcing the 8 locations for their medical marijuana centers, leaving hundreds of potential patients hundreds of miles away from the nearest clinic. And in the Great White North of Alaska, we've got Anchorage residents who are picking sides on whether or not to ban marijuana-related businesses in Alaska's largest city. All of that coming up on the Russ Belville Show, Hour 1. Then stay tuned for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
You can get 420 Radio on the go with the TuneIn Radio app for all mobile platforms. Go to rad-r.us/420tunein or just click the TuneIn Radio icon below the live radio feed on 420radio.org. Five of the last 9 major party candidates to run for president, 3 of the last 9 vice presidential candidates, and the last 3 two-term presidents have all smoked pot. Marijuana, the gateway drug to the White House. This is the Russ Belville Show. The Hot Box Podcast, replaying Thursdays at 11 Pacific on 420radio.org.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact Normal at norml.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORMAL.
It's time for the 420 Radio News, covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Transcripts of 420 Radio News are available daily on our website at 420radio.org. Now, here's Russ Belville with your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds.
This is your 420 Radio News for Monday, December 15th, 2014. On Saturday night, the U.S. Senate joined the House of Representatives in voting in favor of the $1.1 trillion government funding bill that will fund the government through September. Embedded deep within the 1,600-page legislation that's come to be known colloquially as the Cannabis bill, or Continuing Resolution Omnibus Bill, is a provision that'll roll back Uncle Sam's raiding power on medical marijuana facilities. Section 538 of the bill explicitly states that no money appropriated from this bill can be used by the Department of Justice, quote, to prevent such states from implementing their own state laws that authorize the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of medical marijuana, end quote. Also in the Cannabis bill that passed in the Senate on Saturday includes a provision inserted by Republicans that prohibits the city of Washington, D.C. from spending tax dollars to enact their marijuana legalization initiative. D.C. Council Chairman Phil Mendelson said Friday that he plans to ignore the provision and instead follow the usual procedure for a voter-approved referendum in a city required to submit federal oversight. He will send a bill implementing Initiative 71 to Congress in January for a 30-day review, during which federal lawmakers can veto it or let it stand. D.C. Democrats say they are ready to wager that Republicans will be unwilling to get bogged down in overturning the city's marijuana law, which 7 in 10 voters supported in last month's election. Doing so, Republican strategists acknowledge, risks exposing a divide between Republican conservatives and libertarians that could prove consequential to the 2016 presidential race. The Porch Creek Indians are evaluating a Department of Justice decision that could allow pot sales in Alabama. The Porch Creek is one of 566 federally recognized tribes around the country. They currently operate Wind Creek casinos in South Alabama. The Justice Department issued a memo to U.S. attorneys informing them that tribes will be allowed to grow and sell marijuana on reservations, even in states where the drug remains illegal. It's not clear how many tribes would actually be interested in entering the marijuana trade. Oregon U.S. Attorney Amanda Marshall told the Associated Press that only 3 tribes, one in California, one in Washington State, and one in the Midwest, have expressed an interest in the marijuana business. Derek Peterson may soon become the first CEO of a public company that cultivates, distributes, and sells marijuana. TerraTech Corporation, based in Irvine, California, won approval last week from the Securities and Exchange Commission to raise $6.8 million to build and operate medical marijuana operations in Nevada, and will seek to raise about $7 million more later in the year, Peterson said. Peterson is betting the federal government will drop its opposition to marijuana after voters in California and Nevada approved ballot measures in 2016 that will legalize recreational use. Along along with already ongoing recreational sales in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, that may force the federal government to revisit its prohibition, he said. Quote, I firmly believe this industry will be regulated like alcohol, Peterson said. If all goes well, I'm optimistic the federal government could end its prohibition in 5 to 10 years, end quote. Minnesota has 87 counties, but you'll only be able to buy medical marijuana in 8 of them. With half the state's proposed clinics clustered around the Twin Cities, gaps in the cannabis coverage map will leave some families hours away from the nearest clinic. None of them will open anywhere near the southwestern corner of Minnesota. Jeremy Pauling of Montevideo is facing a 2-hour drive to St. Cloud to access the cannabis oil he hopes might bring some relief to his 7-year-old daughter, Caitlin, who's battling a debilitating seizure disorder. He worries, however, about frail patients who live even farther away from the planned clinics than he does. Laverne in southwest Minnesota is 200 miles from the nearest clinic. So is Roseau to the north. It's a 3.5-hour drive from Grand Marais to the clinic in Hibbing. Anchorage residents will get a chance to testify Tuesday on whether the Anchorage Assembly should vote to ban commercial marijuana facilities in Alaska's largest city. Anchorage appears to be the first community considered the opt-out provision of the initiative. At least one assembly member on the Kenai Peninsula has indicated he plans to introduce legislation that would ban commercial grow operations in the Kenai Peninsula borough, while in Fairbanks, leaders came to no conclusions on how they might regulate the substance. This has been your 420 Radio News for Monday, December 15th, 2014. I'm Russ Belville. You can get 420 Radio on the go with the Ustream video app for Android and iPhone. Go to rad-r.us/420ustream or just click the Ustream app icon for Android or iPhone below the live radio feed at 420radio.org.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
The Russ Belville Show reminds you to never smoke and drive impaired. Hang out for a while. Share.
Tokers, there's no good reason to get your dog stoned. While it might not harm them physically, imagine being a dog who already begs for treats all day, and then imagine that dog having the munchies. Not cool.
There's so much I worry about as a mom. Stephen Harper thinks that organized crime should continue to profit from marijuana prohibition. Imagine regulating marijuana like alcohol and cigarettes with a strong and clear educational message, making it more difficult for my kids and your kids to access. Drug dealers don't ask for ID. Stephen Harper does not have the kind of judgment we need to protect our children, authorized by the Normal Women's Alliance of Canada.
Welcome back, everyone. 13 after the hour, and time for us to go behind the headlines where a Texas lawmaker has filed a marijuana decriminalization bill. That was just today when Texas State Representative Joe Moody, who's a Democrat from El Paso, proposed a new law downgrading possession of an ounce or less of marijuana to just a $100 civil fine. Possession of 2 ounces or less of marijuana is currently a criminal offense in the Lone Star State, leading to arrest, up to 6 months in jail and a $2,000 fine, and a lifelong criminal record. At the press conference this morning, Representative Moody said, quote, "Our current marijuana policy in Texas just isn't working. We need a new approach that allows us to more effectively utilize our limited criminal justice resources. This legislation is a much-needed step in the right direction." End quote. Now, some of you might be shocked to hear of marijuana reform happening in such a conservative state, but for a few years now, Texas has been a hotbed of marijuana activism. Normal chapters in Dallas-Fort Worth, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, and Waco have been raising awareness of the need for reform in Texas for over a decade now. I've visited the state many times since 2011. I've gotten to meet a lot of these reformers in person, and their dedication to marijuana law reform is to be congratulated and admired. They do face a lot of headwind in Texas. They got a lot of opposition and a lot of conservatism in this very religious state. So kudos to them for all the work they've been doing. One of the things they've been putting on is the Texas Regional Marijuana Conference. And at this conference, the last conference I was at, octogenarian Ann Lee announced the formation of Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. 84-year-old woman. She's the mother of Richard Lee, who put up $1.5 million of his own money to run California's Prop 19 legalization campaign all the way back in 2010 that got this whole ball rolling for the rest of the country. Ann Lee was at the press conference representing Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. She said, quote, "There is broad support for reducing marijuana possession penalties, and it spans the political spectrum. The prohibition of marijuana is diametrically opposed to the Republican principles of limited government, individual responsibility, and personal freedom. There is nothing conservative about it." End quote. Now, Mrs. Lee was joined by retired Texas District Court Judge and guest on our show, John Delaney, who's a speaker for law enforcement against prohibition. Judge Delaney said, quote, "Giving a ticket for small amounts of marijuana makes sense. The fine can be paid by mail, so police, prosecutors, and our courts will be able to use their limited resources for more important matters." End quote. Now, the grassroots efforts of these Texas activists have been greatly aided by some very brave politicians, like former El Paso City Councilman Beto O'Rourke, who in 2009 led his city council in a unanimous vote to begin an open and honest debate on the war on drugs. In 2012, O'Rourke went on to defeat an 8-term congressman who attacked him for his pro-marijuana legalization stance. He currently serves in the U.S. House of Representatives, having won re-election in 2014 with 2/3 of the vote. It's no surprise that State Representative Moody, like U.S. Representative O'Rourke, would offer their voices from El Paso, Texas, in support of statewide decriminalization. El Paso sits across the border from Juarez, Mexico, where some of the most brutal and constant violence of the Mexican drug war takes place. Homicides, driven by the war between the Sinaloa and Juarez cartels, peaked at over 3,500 in 2010, but have steadily declined to less than 500 homicides in 2013. Now, it's not surprising that Texans would be ready to accept marijuana decriminalization. According to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, there were over 72,000 arrests for marijuana in Texas in 2013, even though in 2007 the state legislature passed a bill allowing local governments to use a summons for marijuana offenses rather than an arrest. And out of those 72,000 marijuana arrests in Texas, an astounding 97% of them were for mere possession of marijuana only. Meanwhile, according to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, 90% of all burglaries and 88% of all car thefts in Texas went unsolved in 2013. It's no wonder Texans are beginning to call for some changes in their marijuana policies when real crime is running rampant in the Lone Star State. And it's showing in the polls. A recent poll by the Marijuana Policy Project showed that 61% of Texans would support a decriminalization effort similar to what Representative Moody is proposing. This is one of 3 proposals, and I believe probably the one with the most chance of making it through the Texas legislature. Governor Rick Perry there in Texas is somewhat against decriminalization, having said that 2007 change has pretty much already decriminalized in Texas, but the results show that it hasn't taken that turn. It's not really decriminalized when the summons is still for a criminal court, and the summons can still lead to an arrest and still lead to a criminal record. That was one of those half measures that a legislature often will try to take to blunt, if you'll pardon the pun, to try to blunt some of the support for marijuana legalization or decrim. Pass a half measure that takes all of the attention away from the issue, just like Governor Schwarzenegger in California did with decrim during Richard Lee's Prop 19 campaign. Pass a little bit of what the people want, and maybe they won't keep asking for all of what they want. But I don't think Texans are fooled. I think they realize that the arrests are still happening if they live anywhere outside of the Austin, Texas area. And they realize that every person that is arrested and jailed and given a criminal record is money that is paid by the taxpayers of Texas to fund those cops, courts, rehabs, and drug tests. It's time to decriminalize in Texas.
Hey, everybody, we're all going to get laid.
Wow, that's one of the effects of decriminalization I hadn't seen coming. It's 4:20 in the Mountain Time Zone. Everyone in Colorado is lighting up legally. Everyone else, do what you got to do, because it is 20 after. We'll be right back with some drug war data mining after this break.
.420 Radio is 24-hour marijuana legalization radio. Hey tokers and tokettes, Radical Russ here for the Cannador, a practical solution to keep herbs from drying. The Cannador is the perfect airtight storage system for your fine herbs, from the half-inch thick walnut and cherry wood construction, clear top perforated jars for storage, and the humidity bead system that keeps your herbs at a perfect 65% relative humidity. I keep all my herbs in the Cannador, and you should too. Check out Cannador.com for more information. A Cannabis broadcast, replaying Fridays at 10 Pacific on 420radio.org. Get.buzz. .buzz is the internet platform that fuels community interest, excitement, and new experiences. .buzz is the premier online destination for internet users seeking the latest news on a variety of topics. .buzz appeals to groups active in blogging, communications, journalism, advertising, and marketing. .buzz offers registrants a stronger alternative to the shrinking namespace of existing top-level domain names, such as .com, .net, and .org. Get your name now at get.buzz. Arguing for the end of adult marijuana prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It is even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more in this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Welcome back, everyone. 22 and a half after the hour, and in the Drug War Data Mine today, we head back to the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, the SAMHSA archives, that bring us all sorts of great information from our federal drug war databases. And today, I'd like to take a look at the Drug Abuse Warning Network. This is one we haven't looked at much, and one that's been discontinued, but goes up and through 2011. These are the data that supposedly tell us how much drugs are mentioned by people as they go into the ER. But let's look instead at, I've just decided that's not going to work for us for what we're looking for today. So we'll go back to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the most recent episode of that National Survey from 2013. By clicking that folder, you can go straight to the online analysis SDA. When you first go to this page, there'll be a terms of use page. You just have to accept the terms of use, and you'll be moved ahead to all of the rows and columns so you can get the statistics you're looking for. And it might be interesting to find out today, we're going to answer the question of how many people are using marijuana on a regular basis. Now, one way you can answer this question is to look in the imputed substance use. Imputed substance use has some variables that have been calculated for you, one of which you can get is recency of drug use. Opening that up shows you all the different types of drugs, cigars, pipes, smokeless tobacco, chewing tobacco, and here we have marijuana. And the first variable there, IRM-JRC, marijuana recency. If you double click that, it'll end up in the top section, and then you can copy it to the row. When it comes to doing a table, you need to have a variable in the row. That's the minimum. You can add more stuff later, but I always like to do these things one step at a time, try to see what you're working with. So with IRM-JRC, you scroll down just a little bit and you can run that table. Running that table will open up a new tab, which will tell us that in the United States, currently within the past 30 days, 7.6% of the population, or 19.9 million people, have used marijuana in the past month. There are almost 20 million monthly marijuana smokers in this country. But one of the problems with coming up with this is a data set that gives us all ages of marijuana users. So this is going to include people aged 12 to 20 as well. And that's going to be a significant proportion of all of this 19.9 million people, since younger people tend to use marijuana more often. We can control for this, though, by going back to our original data where we have our table set up with IRMJRC, and we can add what's called a selection filter. A selection filter allows us to filter out based on a certain variable. Now, knowing what you want to filter out by involves finding the data that you want to work with. In this case, let's figure it out by age, the demographics, how old someone is, because we don't want to include the kids. In the imputed demographics, core demographics, here we go. We can find age 2, the final edited age. Double click that, puts it up top. Use the column button to copy it to the column section. Scroll down and run the table. And you will see that the ages range from 12 all the way up to 65 or older. And those are based on codes, like 65 and older is code number 17. In the case of ages up to age 21 is codes number 1 through 9. So we're really only interested in the users who are aged 21 or older. That would be codes 10 through 17. So if we go back to the page, get rid of age 2 in the column section, and instead in the selection filter, we'll put age 2, and then the range in parentheses 10 through 17 with a dash as through, right? 10 to 17. So this means it's only going to select the IRMJRC variable for those people whose age fits in age group 10 through 17, which is age 21 to however old it was, 100 or something. Scroll down to run the table, and we now find that among adults age 21 and older, 6.9% of the population is using marijuana monthly, and that represents 15.4 million. Remember, it was 19.9 million when we had the kids in there, so that tells us there's about 4.5 million underage cannabis users. That is to say, almost 1/4 of the cannabis users using monthly are under the age of 21.
420 Radio, the activist radio station. Are you a hypocrite? If you live a closeted cannabis lifestyle, you are. Read about 7 people living a closeted cannabis lifestyle who are on the verge of coming out in The Hypocrites by Mara K. Eaton. Available at areyouahypocrite.net. You can purchase the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, also available on iTunes. Check out Mara K. Eaton on Facebook as well. Learn more at areyouahypocrite.net.
NORMAL stands for Responsible Adult Cannabis Use. If cannabis use is causing problems in your life, consider taking a break or seeking medical assistance. Consider ceasing cannabis use if you have a family history of mental illness. Don't drive or operate heavy machinery while impaired by cannabis use. Cannabis use is not without risks, even though the risks may be far less than those posed by legal drugs.
Growing plants indoors can be a rewarding hobby, but electricity bills can go through the roof. Then you have to cool down all those big hot lights. It can drive a grower insane. With Lush LED lighting, you can solve many of these issues and double your rewards. Matt and his scientists have developed the perfect light for flowering plants with far less cost and heat. And the results? Very effective. Check out LushLEDlighting.com right now and tell them Radical Russ sent you.
It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
All right, welcome back, everyone. 29 and a half after the hour, and we've got Dr. Mitch on the phone. How you doing, Mitch?
Great day, great day.
You know, I have to disagree. I'm not very fond of upstate New York right now after the NFL game.
I can certainly understand.
I'm not happy at all. Dang it. Oh, well. At least I'm upset about something that really doesn't mean anything. So there we go. Oh, so we're headed out to the end of the year here and taking questions from our chat room here on 420radio.org, or you can dial us live at 971-533-7111. And before we take our questions, we always open up with Dr. Mitch telling us the first word and what's the latest in cannabis science.
As I think you mentioned, there's FDA approval for a study at University of Alabama in Birmingham looking at basically a cannabidiol-based oil on both pain and some seizure stuff. And then there was a, I thought, kind of disappointing article in the Journal of American Medical Association trying to basically blame a whole lot of things in Colorado on new cannabis laws that, in fact, seem to ignore some of the problems related to prohibition.
You know, I'm interested in these studies now and whether or not FDA is going to prove these things because, number one, we're talking about CBD oil where there's no chance of intoxication, but more to the point with the recent news, with this Cannabis bill passing and saying they're not going to mess with the states that have medical marijuana laws. How do you think that's going to bode for the FDA and NIDA approving these studies in the future?
It's funny because I feel like if that's really the case, if you're not in a university where federal funding might be threatened under those circumstances, then I feel like those guys are going to sidestep NIDA and essentially, use cannabis or at least, rely on state sources in a way that's really going to have the chance to make big advances as far as some of this stuff is concerned. I know a lot of universities are pretty apprehensive about this. Nobody wants to seem to be the first one. But if somebody will, sort of take the lead with it, I think we're going to see a lot of really great, interesting new data.
So is this, that's something that's realistic now, is using state-sourced marijuana rather than relying on Dr. El Soli's University of Mississippi swag?
Well, so Igor Grant down at UC San Diego pulled this off when they had some money coming in from when California's laws first changed, and got away with it. And those data are published and actually pretty interesting. And then I feel like that might set a precedent. I could certainly imagine folks in Colorado going ahead and braving it, or maybe setting up some little off-campus location that could end up being a research area that got IRB approval. And suddenly we'll get more data on these different strains and individual effects that might be strain dependent. It's wide open and it seems like it could go okay. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and this provision in the Cannabis bill is on funding for the Department of Justice. So that doesn't really touch NIDA or FDA, does it?
Well, but in fact, NIDA's only reason to be involved in this is because they were the only legal source of cannabis for this kind of research before. But I feel like, again, if investigators can get cannabis essentially legally because of state laws, they ought to be capable of gathering some of the data we really need on this.
All right. Well, let's go to our chat room because we got a question here. A fellow Idahoan asking whether or not what you could tell us about cannabis and traumatic brain injury.
Well, so we've got some pretty compelling evidence, at least in the animal literature, that cannabinoids can protect neurons from trauma-related damage. And so if you can basically get cannabinoids in the system as soon after a trauma as possible, odds are high it's going to turn out a lot better than if you didn't.
That's great news, and we are looking forward to the day when that makes its way to sports, combat sports and NHL and NFL. These guys, suffer a great deal of traumatic brain injury, and we see the toll that it takes on them, even in their late 40s, early 50s. So we really need to get this moving forward, and hopefully now that we're getting some leeway from the federal government with respect to the medical states, maybe some of these athletic commissions can come around on this now, since it doesn't look like the feds are going to give them any problem. Have you heard any word with respect to that angle, the sports science angle of this?
I know Lester Grinspoon wrote a really heartfelt tale, and he's quite the football fan, so he wanted to make a big deal about how he wants to enjoy the sport and not feel guilty about people taking a good hit. And, a pounding.
Right.
And the idea that there might be a vaporizer on the sidelines and you wouldn't go back in after you had some cannabis, but that would be available in order to minimize the impact would just be good common sense.
Yeah, would love to see that happen. All right, let's go to that piece that we saw trying to blame a lot of health problems on Colorado legalization. It seems like, both sides are eager to say what legalization has meant in Colorado, both good and bad. What did you take away from this article that was kind of, didn't really sit well with you?
My disappointment is both about this cyclic vomiting syndrome, which, again, we don't have a ton of published data, maybe 12 individual cases. It's not clear what these folks were using. We really don't have a lot of folks who are using, above ground registered good cannabis like we have in Colorado and Washington. And then they're claiming, I get this cyclic vomiting syndrome. We've got, enough cases to think something's going on, certainly, but I have no idea whether it's really cannabis or some kind of contaminant that might have been in these. And nobody seems to pay attention to the idea that maybe this is a product of prohibition in an underground market. And then anytime anybody blames cannabis for these flash fires associated with, poorly made oil, it really makes my blood boil, because this is not a product of cannabis. This is a byproduct of prohibition and really, an industrial accident that's in part often the result of trying to be surreptitious or clandestine in the way that you're making these oils.
Yeah. Every now and then a moonshine still in the woods would explode in Kentucky too, back in the day.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Oh my gosh. And yeah, I'm seeing that as well. People that are trying to talk about this hyperemesis syndrome. I got an email from a listener who wanted to correct me when I mentioned, this possible cyclical vomiting syndrome, because it's a different thing. He said he actually has the cyclical vomiting syndrome, the original syndrome, absent any, cannabis use. He'd already had that diagnosis, and he found that cannabis actually helped him with the CVC, and said that it was a different thing than what people are talking about when they say over dab or something like that. Is there a great difference, or is just not a lot known yet?
The clincher on this seems to be its persistence. So people claim that they're, literally vomiting all day long, and the only way they can get relief is with these hot showers, and it doesn't last very long. And, yes, there are a lot of, CB2 receptors along the GI tract, but I honestly, I'm super suspicious that this is some kind of oddball contaminant, some strange fertilizer issue, or something about some mutant strain that really never got discovered, in part because the base rate of this phenomenon is just so low.
Okay. We've got some folks in the chat room that wanted to wish you and your family a happy Hanukkah, considering the season starts tomorrow, I believe. And that leads to the question, is cannabis kosher?
What's funny is this seems to come out every year around Passover, because certain seeds and certain grains end up being forbidden during Passover. And as you guys know, my father-in-law is a rabbi, and I actually ended up contacting somebody at the University of Judaism about this, and he says, by all means, your hemp seeds are completely kosher, and like a lot of grains, just make sure you don't overeat them.
There we go. Got another question here. A person asking about any tips for purchasing cannabis topicals, trying to find some for arthritis and having limited results.
I got to admit, the transdermal work is very hard to predict, and some of the patches now actually have other things built in to kind of create light scratches along the skin so that there's a better chance for absorption. I don't have any published data on this, unfortunately, and I know some folks really swear by, say, coconut oil or some other oils. The only times I've ever used them, I've also been getting a massage at the same time, so I honestly don't know if it was the massage or the cannabis oil. And I think it's unfortunately a situation where we just have to try and hope for the best, or else turn to these patches that seem to have a patented way to transmit cannabinoids transdermally.
All right. Well, returning back to the subject of cannabis and religion, we get a question from the chat room about the early Jewish and Christian people and their use of cannabis and whether or not it was truly an anointing oil as used by the rabbis back then.
Well, so there's a lot of debate on this, and in part the Hebrew and Aramaic words sound a little bit like cannabis. But when I, actually sit down with folks who are kind of immersed in that area of scholarship, they sort of chuckle and say odds are against it. If you think about where cannabis first started in Taiwan and how it might have made its way down to northern Africa, it's not inconceivable, and this may be one of those things that we just really never have an answer to.
All right. Well, yeah, a lot of people feel pretty strongly about that. I've heard references to it being actually calamus or some sort of fragrant cane. No real way of getting any sure answer on this, I wouldn't imagine.
It's funny because the historians are big on that calamus interpretation and actually find that a little more compelling and more likely, in part just because we don't see a ton of hemp or other related things in those same areas, which you might want to predict if the plant really were available.
Okay, one last question here with regard to psoriasis. Got a person who mentions using a cannabis-infused olive oil for treatment of psoriasis. Is that something you've heard about, or other general cannabis treatments for psoriasis?
I have in the skin conditions more generally, in eczema as well. And I think oil alone actually does have some impact, so we don't want to overinterpret the cannabinoid contribution. But it's one of those things, too, where there aren't a lot of negative consequences, so why not give it a try and see what happens? It's not like you're going to have some nasty side effect like you might with some other prescribed medications.
All right. Well, as we get more and more legal, we'll have more and more opportunity to get more and more data, and we can get some real answers to some of this stuff. But for now, we thank you for what we do know, Dr. Mitch, and thank our listeners for asking the questions. Thanks for being here.
And a hearty happy Hanukkah to everybody.
All right. We'll light one up for 8 days in a row. How's that? Thanks, Dr. Mitch. All right, stay tuned, folks. We got time for a radical rant here. We're going to talk about that, perceptions of legal marijuana, how society is being forced to change through legality. Stick around.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
420 Radio, the home of marijuana experts.
You know Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs, we've got Frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs, we've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter.
In the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Russ Belville Show presents the anti-drug public service announcement of the day. This has been the anti-drug public service announcement of the day. To cure this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Russ Belville Show every weekday on 420radio.org. When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers.
The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
You can't handle the truth.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
You have offended my family.
Hey, this is great, man.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
I know nothing.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
We don't need no stinking budget.
Homosexuality, no. Immorality general.
How in the century you have slurred the meaning of the words we, the people.
Be warned, this is not your mother's marijuana.
You could ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
I want to ask you a bunch of questions. I want to have them answered immediately.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
Welcome back, everyone. 46 after the hour, and wanted to talk a little bit today about the perceptions of legal marijuana. You know, for years, we've been treated as second-class citizens, as criminals, as outlaws, for our love of the cannabis plant. And it was easy enough to treat us that way because there was direct support from the federal government and our state governments for treating us that way. We were engaged in something illegal, something contraband, and from a societal point of view, something dirty, something untoward, a nasty habit, taking drugs. But now we're faced with a situation where for the past 20 years almost, we've had medical marijuana. And for the past 2 years, we've had legal marijuana in 2 states. We're going to continue with legal marijuana in 4 states, and even in our nation's capital, most likely, leading to 2016, where at least Nevada and most likely California and maybe a couple of other states are voting for legalization. I wouldn't be surprised to see 4 states on the ballot. And for us in the span of 4 years to go from 2 legal to 4 legal to 8 legal states, to double each time, that's a kind of an inevitable momentum that is difficult to vote against, difficult to bet against, I should say. But that quick momentum in the voting booth may not match the slow trudge of society to then recognize, respect, and treat equally the users of cannabis. See, it's been so long, for generations now, that the consumer of cannabis could be demeaned as potheads, as stoners, as dopers. And those labels have built a life of their own and a concept of their own and a frame of their own that has always made it difficult for anyone to openly admit their cannabis use. You could be the most successful, intelligent, responsible cannabis consumer out there, but once you get labeled as a doper or a stoner or a pothead, there's the inevitable jokes and puns, and anytime you slip up, you know that there's an extra view on you. If you know, regular folks have brain farts all the time, right? They have brain farts all the time. They'll forget this or forget that. But if you've been admitted to be a cannabis consumer and you forget something, it's not treated as just a simple brain fart that anybody might have. It's opportunity for a joke about your memory loss. Smoking too much weed. Similarly, people that might get into a car accident on a slick road that is completely not their fault would be looked at as some sort of criminal if they had non-impairing marijuana metabolites in their system. An accident they couldn't have avoided either, but they will be looked at differently if they're known to be a cannabis consumer. So how long is it going to take before we move from legality to equality, both in a legal sense and in a societal sense? It's going to be quite a while. I've already ranted a few times about the 1,000 feet from a school rule. Not only can there not be pot shops 1,000 feet from a school, but there can't be personal home grows, at least in Oregon. That could be the situation right now, within 1,000 feet of a school. And you have to ask why. Why should there be discrimination against a person growing pot in their own home just because it's near a place where children might be learning? Nobody thinks of having those types of restrictions on one's prescription drugs or alcohol or smoking habits if they live within 1,000 feet of a school. But again, this is because the perception differs from the reality. In the reality, having someone grow their own marijuana 1,000 feet away from a school is no more harmful than them brewing their own beer or having a bottle of OxyContin in their shelf in their medicine cabinet. But the perception of marijuana is something that in and of itself leads to evil, leads to crime, leads to danger, leads to violence, or at least leads to Fritos. And it's still seen by the public and by our perceptions as a bad, wicked, evil, naughty thing that must be kept from the pure children's eyes. We don't seem to think that, though, when it comes to alcohol. We don't seem to think about what about the children if we take them outside and there's signs for bars everywhere they look. If every grocery store they go to, there's a beer aisle. Nobody bats an eye about that. Nobody thinks twice about that because beer is culturally accepted. It certainly has nothing to do with the relative harm of the two items to the user, to the society, or even to children. I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to who said, I don't want my kids smoking pot or drinking alcohol, but if I have to choose, they'd choose the weed. Because they know what's more harmful to their kid. They know what's more likely to get their kid into a fight or a wreck or an alcohol or an overdose that could lead them to the hospital. It's the alcohol, not the marijuana. But when it comes to whether or not our kids are going to see a pot shop or whether or not they're going to see a pot plant, everything has to be in closed, locked spaces and opaque containers and frosted glass windows on the dispensaries. By God, we can't let the children see the thing because why? Why is the pot plant more offensive than the opium plant? You know, opium poppies are legal in this country, right? You know, you can grow decorative opium poppies. Nobody thinks twice for the kids about the opium poppy, though, even though the plant itself is producing something that can have far more harmful effects to human beings when they're used. Nobody thinks twice about that. But the pot plant can't be seen. And not so much because its sight will, melt the retinas of those who might view it, but because of the symbol it stands for. The symbol of marijuana means so much more than the marijuana itself. That symbol, to so many people, especially older people in this country, still means anti-America, still means protesting the Vietnam War, still means liberal politics, still means amnesty, acid, and abortion, as it was once coined by the Republicans back in the day. And these types of perceptions are going to take a long time to change. I found this story in the Colorado Springs Gazette about the ski towns in Colorado. Now, we have seen from the sales numbers for legal marijuana that in the city, like in Denver or so, Denver, major cities and such, about 50% of the marijuana gets sold to tourists, about 50% gets sold to locals. But once you get up to those ski resort towns, it's 90% of the sales at these ski resort town pot shops are going to tourists. And ski resorts like Breckenridge, Aspen, Vail, and so forth. In fact, nationwide, ski resorts have always been kind of a hotbed of stoner culture. It's always been known that you can smoke a joint on your way up the chairlift. There have always been little safe shacks. You know what those are? Safe shack is a little clandestine, illegal shack built off of the ski trail, off of the slope, off to the side in the woods, where people can go in and get safe. Have a safety meeting. Smoke weed. And this has been an accepted part of skier culture for a long time. But now some of these ski resort towns are worried about it being too open. It was all fine when it was on the down low, whenever it was winking and nudging about smoking their weed at Breckenridge. But now that there's actually a pot shop on Main Street, oh my God, we can't have that. In fact, Breckenridge residents voted to move the Main Street dispensary. They got one dispensary in Breckenridge to move it to a less visible location. So we're okay if it happens as long as we don't have to see it. As long as it doesn't have to be visible. The Breckenridge councilman, there's a Breckenridge councilman named Gary Gallagher. He voted for legalizing marijuana, but also voted to move the Cannabis Club. Said, quote, marijuana, it is not in this country's DNA yet. It's a little bit too early, end quote. It's still too early. It's legal, but it's still legal in a we don't want to see it method. We don't want to see it. We don't want to know that it's legal. We don't want to be confronted by the fact that it's legal. We don't want to have to explain to our kids what that funny smell is. We don't want to have to talk to the kids about why smoking pot's bad for them but not for adults. Just too difficult. As far as these ski resorts being worried about the perception of marijuana affecting the tourism, though, that doesn't seem to be the case. Tourism's the number 2 industry in Colorado, and they got $17.3 billion in tourism the year after legalization. They had a record number of visitors in Colorado, 64.6 million. And they're saying that 2014 is likely to beat those records. But, of course, the people in the tour industry don't want to admit that legal marijuana has anything to do with it. They don't have any studies on it either. They don't seem to be too interested in finding out. They like to paint it as kind of a wash. They like to say, well, we've heard from some people that they've come to Colorado because of legal pot, but then we've heard from other people who said they'll never come back to Colorado because of the legal pot. So it's a wash. It's no effect either way. Except my perception of this, given that prohibition is the default mindset of people, given that hatred of marijuana is the default mindset, the fact that tourism didn't go down is a win. If legalization were the awful, terrible thing that the opponents say that it is, and that people hate marijuana so much, tourism would have gone down in Colorado, wouldn't it? Now, another point here is that this is going to be an issue that's going to take a long time to change. We already have seen with alcohol that people aren't turned off by alcohol, even though we know what terrible effect it has on their kids. But families don't freak out if the little kids have to see tourists drinking beer or even alcohol in an open air bar, in a patio somewhere in Breckenridge or Aspen or even Denver. So I believe that in a culture that has figured out how to get by with legal alcohol, how to have cultural norms around alcohol, how to be able to understand that alcohol's for adults and some people misuse it, and that it's not for children. The fact that we've been able to do that with the most dangerous, most addictive drugs, alcohol and tobacco, I think bodes well for the future of the perception of marijuana as it becomes more and more legalized. I think I will live to a time where I'm talking to 20-somethings and trying desperately to have them try to understand what it was like to be paranoid over marijuana, what it was like to fear for your freedom, what it was like to worry whether or not that car was a cop car behind you. I hope we all live to see that day when the memories of prohibition and the cultural mistreatment of cannabis consumers are as difficult for us to imagine as slavery. That's all the time we got for Hour 1. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio is next. We'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. Hope you're all having a great holiday season. Thanks for supporting us here at 420radio.org. For everyone here, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it,